The ministry for today is from 2 Kings. Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Aramaeans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 10,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and he said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elijah's house. Elijah sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman became angry and went away, saying, "I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" He turned and went away in a rage. But his servants approached him and said, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said to you was, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean.
Thank you, Frank. So if you hadn't noticed it yet, I would like to call your attention to the cartoon that is in your bulletin. It's on page 18, or if you prefer, the inside of the back cover to the bulletin. I don't know if we have that, Renee? We don't? Okay. But it is in your bulletin. And I had that cartoon added to the bulletin on this day because we are approaching the 30-day mark. The 30-day mark. See, research suggests that it takes about 30 days for us to establish a new habit, to make a helpful and desired change in our lives, to fulfill a New Year's resolution. Although I don't know if you've made any New Year's resolutions this year, I understand that people are less and less inclined to make New Year's resolutions. I made a couple. One of my New Year's resolutions was to gain 4 inches in height. because I realized that there was a better chance of that happening than my losing the 15 pounds that I probably should. And I also resolved to be less snarky and sarcastic this year. Like that's going to happen. I didn't even make it past New Year's Day on that one. But the 30-day mark is seen to be the threshold for, again, establishing a new habit, making a needed, helpful change in our lives, or, again, establishing a New Year's resolution. Okay? Except, I'm not sure now is a good time for us to try to make it to the 30-day mark. Because as John Norcross, the distinguished professor of psychology at the University of Scranton, and a guy who has been studying habit development, life change, New Year's resolutions for decades, tells us, times of heightened stress, anxiety, and uncertainty, which seems to me at least characterizes this time, probably a lot of times, but certainly this time, Norcross tells us that times of heightened stress, anxiety, and uncertainty make it much more difficult, make it much less likely that we will be able to establish a new habit, make a desired, helpful change in our lives, keep to a New Year's resolution. And while, of course, with all phenomena like that, there are multiple variables that can be involved. But Norcross says that one of the central reasons why it is so difficult to establish a new habit or make a helpful life change in heightened times of stress, anxiety, and uncertainty has to do with control. It has to do with our innate human need for control, or to believe that we are in control of our lives. And Norcross says that that innate human need for control, or to believe that we are in control, while like all kinds of psychological and behavioral things, can be quite helpful. It can help us to be more confident. It can help to empower us. It also has some serious potential downsides. 4 in particular that Norcross points to, 4 that he sees as interconnected. First, Norcross says that that innate need for control, or to believe that we are in control, can lead us to become more vulnerable to rigidity and closed-mindedness. And Norcross says that in terms of changing our behavior, in terms of developing new habits, that is the very opposite of the flexibility and open-mindedness that that requires. Connected to that, Norcross says, our need for control, or to believe that we have it, can lead us to become more vulnerable to developing an egocentric view of the world. An egocentric view of the world. Lead us to more and more convince ourselves that we are the center of the universe. Or connected to that, fall victim to what the pioneering psychologist Karen Horney referred to as the tyranny of the shoulds. The idea that we shouldn't just be in control, we should be in control. That we don't just need it, we should have it. We should have this. We should be that. And then the third thing, the third interrelated thing that Norcross points to is that our innate need for control or to believe we have it can leave us vulnerable to not just resisting but rejecting expertise. As Tom Nichols, the retired professor of national affairs at the U.S. Naval College, says in his best-selling book, The Death of Expertise, our need for control in heightened times of stress and anxiety and uncertainty can lead us to more and more become not just people, but a society that not just thinks, but convinces itself that it knows more. It knows more about everything and anything than those who have spent years or decades studying or training in whatever area they're talking about. Nichols says that we are becoming more and more of a society in which we believe that we are our own experts. And then connected to that, Norcross says, is the fourth thing. The fourth downside of that innate need for control or to believe we have it, especially in times of heightened stress, anxiety, and uncertainty. It can make us more vulnerable to insisting on the big fix, to wanting to have whatever it is, whatever habit we want to develop or change we want to make, or whatever issue there is out there that troubles us, to be solved in one fell swoop, with one grand gesture. There must be just one reason, one single thing that if we fix that, it'll fix everything. To have someone wave the magic wand and have everything changed. So given all that, all those downsides of that innate need for control or to believe we have it, especially in heightened times of stress and anxiety and uncertainty, good for you, Naaman. Good for you, buddy. As the writer of the second book of Kings tells us in the scene that Frank just shared with us, Naaman is the second most powerful guy in the land of Aram. Aram, in that time and place, part of what is now modern-day Syria. Naaman's the second most powerful man in Aram after the king. He is the commander of the army, which means, of course, that he's a guy that's used to having control over a lot of stuff and probably believes he has control over even more. Except that there's this one thing in his life that he doesn't have any control over. The writer tells us that he has leprosy, which in the language of the Bible is a term used to refer to any number of skin-related maladies. He has this skin-related malady, and he can't get rid of it, and he doesn't have any control over it. But there's this little girl, this little Israelite girl, who Naaman's troops captured on one of their raids into the land of Israel. In that time, Aram and Israel were often in conflict with each other. There's this little girl, little Israelite girl that's been captured by Naaman's forces, who now lives in his household, serves his mistress. That little girl, as the expression goes, she knows a guy. She knows about this prophet in Israel, a prophet named Elisha. The little girl thinks, might be able to help Naaman. And Naaman, to his credit, sets aside his need to be in control and is willing to listen to the guidance that this little girl who Naaman and his world see as less than him, subordinate to him. He's willing to set aside his need for control and accept the guidance she has to offer. She offers it through her mistress, Naaman's wife. From there, he goes to his king, fills the king in on what the little girl says. King says, have at it. Gives Naaman a whole bunch of cash and jewelry and clothes and sends him off to the king of Judah, the northern kingdom of Israel in that time. Sends him off with all that stuff and a letter. A letter which we presume is a request for Naaman to be helped. So far, so good. But then things get a little weird. We get into the middle part of the story, and every time I read it, all I can think of is some modern-day romantic comedy movie or some Peter Sellers farce in which everybody misunderstands and misinterprets what's going on. So here's Naaman. Naaman's got all this stuff that he's been given by the king, and he brings it to the king of Judah, and he presents it to the king of Judah, and he gives the letter to the king of Judah. The king of Judah reads it, and he goes, what? He loses his mind. What? Your king expects me to heal you, to cure you? He rips his clothes open. He's so wild. I can't do that. I'm not God. What does he think? And then he gets paranoid. He says, I know what this guy's up to. He's thinking, he's expecting me to cure Naaman, and if I can't, that's going to give him a reason to invade. But then, over here, there's a guy named Elisha, the Israelite prophet. And somehow, word of all that gets to Elisha, and he sends his king, the king of Judah, a message. Calm down, Sparky. I think that's meant for me. I think they're looking for me. So now Naaman gets all that stuff and heads over to Elisha. And this is where Naaman almost gets tripped up. Almost lets that need for control get in the way. And the rigidity, the closed-mindedness, the egocentricity, the dismissiveness of expertise, the insistence on the big fix, all of it almost gets in the way. First off, he expects that Elisha will come out to meet him. Because again, in Naaman's world, the world he is in control of, Elisha is a subordinate, a lesser. And when Elijah doesn't do that, but instead sends out his own messenger to the commander, Naaman is enraged. And he's even more enraged when the messenger tells him that Elijah said all he has to do is go wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and the change he desires will be his. Naaman says, what? 7 times in the Jordan? The Jordan? That nasty river? 7 times? Is he kidding me? First off, he doesn't even come out to greet me like he should, and then he tells me to do that. No big fix. He doesn't come out and just wave his hands, and everything is fine for me. The change I desire is mine. No big fix. Just 7 times doing something ordinary, mundane, unglamorous. But again, to Naaman's credit, he will overcome that. But not without some more help. his servants. Again, a third party that in his world is subordinate to him, lesser. His servants come to him and say, you know, boss, and it might not sound great to you, but if he'd asked you to do some big, hard, complicated thing, would you have done it? And you go, yeah, probably. Well then, why not just do these smaller, simpler steps over and over and over again until you get what you want? And Naaman does. And Naaman is healed. He realizes the change, the helpful change that he desires in his life. Because he is willing to give up his innate need to be in control or believe that he is. Enough to stay open-minded and flexible. Enough to set aside his egocentric view of the world. Enough to be willing to accept the expertise that others offer, even if they are people who he sees as not as good as he is. And lastly, willing to set aside his need for the big fix and instead do the smaller, simpler, unglamorous, ordinary things over and over and over again that are really the heart of, the core of any real lasting change in our lives. So good for you, Naaman. Good for you. And good for you. Good for you. This spiritual community we call Sanibel Congregational United Church of Christ. Because I don't think it's a stretch to say that the last 2.5 years, and really more if you go back to COVID, but certainly the last 2.5 years have been a time of heightened anxiety and stress and uncertainty for you, for us. A time when we easily could have let our innate need for control or to believe we have it keep us from making the desired changes that we needed to make, developing the new habits that we needed to make in response to that heightened time of stress and anxiety and uncertainty. For the last 2.5 years, you have been a community of Naamans, also willing to give up that innate need for control or to believe that we have it enough to remain flexible and open-minded, to put aside any egocentric view of the world for a community-centric view, embrace, accept, and put into use the expertise of others who knew more about whatever it was than we did. And certainly in the case of any of the rebuilding stuff that took place, people who, all of which knew more than I did. And also set aside that need for control enough to realize that there were no big fixes. That what we needed to do was wash in the Jordan 7 times. For the last 2.5 years, we have been a community of Naamans. 3 times, Naaman sets aside his need for control enough to accept guidance from others, and 7 times he puts it aside enough to go wash in the Jordan to do the daily, mundane, ordinary, unglamorous stuff he had to do to realize the change that he wanted. 3, 7. two numbers that throughout the Bible, as we know, symbolize wholeness, completeness. So on this annual meeting Sunday, along with the business of the church that we need to attend to in a short time, I hope you will remember. I hope you will remember that the reason that we are here, the reason that all of this has happened since Hurricane Ian is because we were a community of Naamans. I ask you to remember that, but I also ask you to resolve to continue to be a community of Naamans. Because as we know, you hit that 30-day mark, whether literally or proverbially. It doesn't mean that the change is permanent. It means that you've gotten there, but now you got to maintain it. You got to look to improve it, strengthen it. So I also ask you to resolve to continue to be a community of Naamans, so that we can be the community that God calls us to be and is looking for us to be. And so that, unlike Sisyphus in that cartoon, we can not just roll that boulder up the mountain, but roll it all the way over. Amen. I invite